Hey, it's Gus Prestera again. I'm talking about the Reports on Demand case study that we recently published, and been doing a series of videos where I take you behind the scenes on some of the work that we did around process automation. And so today I want to focus on the report generation and distribution parts of the workflow. So if you've been following along and geeking out with me, I appreciate it. So you recognize that this is the manual process that we were using before the automation, right? So this is the kind of where we started, and you can see the different phases of the process along the top, and then you can see the different roles along the y-axis that form the swim lanes in the swim lane diagram. And this shows the process at a high level. In the last video, we talked about data collection. Now I'm going to talk about phases F and G here, report generation and report distribution. So I'm going to take you through what it looked like before. I'm going to jump down. These are diagrams that break down each of those different phases. So I'm going to go down to report generation. So on this diagram, you can see there's not a lot of steps involved, but each of the steps is pretty important. So the report gets generated. Now we already had kind of an automated way of generating the reports, but they had to be manually triggered, and then they had to be manually reviewed and checked to make sure that they were correct, and then they had to be manually distributed. So those parts of the process we still had yet to automate. You can see here schedule the report readout scheduling that was handled separately also by the lead coach. They would reach out to the individual participants and they'd send them an email with access to a calendar, or they would work through the client's point of contact who would look at their availability internally within their organization. Kind of clunky, kind of time consuming, and it's okay for just a few, 10, 15, 20 people, not a big deal. But when you're talking about hundreds of participants going through a workflow on a given day, thousands over the course of a year, any of those kind of manual steps are going to start to feel very onerous if you're having to set up meetings just to schedule folks, or you're reaching out individually via email, between coach and the participant. So that had to be automated. So the report gets generated, and so a data scientist would say, okay, let's generate the report. They'd go through a series of steps to make that happen, and we'd have a bunch of reports that had to be checked. And they would be checked by the data scientist, they would be checked by the lead coach, a number of different people put eyeballs on it, and we're reviewing it for different criteria and checking for different things. And that was cumbersome. It works fine, again, if you're just doing a batch of them, 10, 15, 20 reports, 25 reports, but 100 reports, 200 reports, and trying to get through them very quickly in hours or minutes, rather than days, that's where this fell down, right? So that we had to automate that part. And then once the reports were finalized and published, then we had to distribute them, which meant attaching them to emails and sending them out one by one, along with meeting invitations and so forth. So again, we had to take the people out of it. So along the y-axis here, you'll see the data engineer is responsible for monitoring, auditing, and troubleshooting any data-related issues that come up during this report generation and distribution. And our data scientists are on call to help troubleshoot, fix any problems in the reports. We went through a lot of testing, so there's really not much of that comes up anymore. The report generation now gets triggered by N8N in this step here. A report gets generated. There's a series of scripts that are up in our AWS cloud in a portion of it that we call the cloud reporting platform. And in that section of the site, each script does a little something different. One of them will take the data that's in the data warehouse, pull it in. Another one will analyze that data to generate the metrics that actually go into the reports. Then another script will create the plots, that is the tables and charts, the dynamic text that have to be generated for that individual report based on their results, the participants' results. And then another script that's going to lay those out inside of the report template. And so it's like a little assembly line, and you've got a bunch of code that's handling all these different parts of it. And then once that report is assembled, then another script will then take that report and convert it into a PDF, which is the final form that it takes before it is then attached to, again by another script, is attached to a Microsoft Office email with boilerplate text on it, and then pushed out to the participant. And you can see that there's a bunch of stuff then that happens down here where the distribution email goes out. If the report is eligible for readout sessions, then a link is available in the email where the participant is asked to pick a date and time for their readout session. Then that goes into our scheduling system, which then assigns a coach and sends a meeting invitation out to the participant, and all that is happening behind the scenes automatically. So all that part of it was all pretty straightforward, because it's just if this, then that, if this, then that, when this happens, this other thing happens, and it's just a series of triggered events that need to happen. Not easy, but not as complicated as trying to figure out how we make sure that the reports are right before they go out the door. And so that's where we had to replicate the wisdom that the data scientists have. What are data scientists checking for when they're reviewing a report before it goes out the door? They're checking the numbers, perhaps. They're checking for certain patterns. They're checking to see if certain things are working or not working right. So we had to figure out what those are, catalog those, and then figure out a way to replicate that in the automated workflow so that there's a check happening for each of those things that the data scientists would look at. Same thing for a coach, right? If there's certain kinds of things that a coach is looking for, we want to make sure that that's right. Graphic designer who designed the layout of the reports, when they're looking at a finished report, they're checking to see that everything's lined up right, that everything's in the right place, that the colors are right. So again, cataloging all those things that they are checking for and trying to make sure that we have that in some sort of a quality control checklist that has to be completed before a report goes out. And that checking of that checklist, if you will, checking the report, needs to be done by the system, right? So N8N is checking for those different criteria to make sure that they're right before the report goes out the door. So as a final check before the report goes out the door, we do give ourselves a day or two window to check the reports manually, and that's a temporary measure that we have in place while the report's still relatively young in its life cycle, to make sure that we have enough time to catch anything that the system might have missed. And that's intentional. And the idea is over time, once you get to a certain point where you've never found any problems, or you haven't found any problems in the last 300 reports, then you can start to back off of that and start to say, okay, now maybe we aren't going to check every report. Maybe we'll only check certain types of reports that are high risk reports, or that for whatever reason we want to escalate for that, or we want to randomly select reports to be checking. So it's like a security check at the airport, right? Like we have to sort of choose what are the criteria for which reports we're going to manually check and which ones we're not, and do that additional due diligence until we get to a point where eventually we don't need to check any of them manually, because we have enough confidence and trust in the process that we know that a system is checking for all the things we needed to check for, and we haven't found any problems, and so we can allow things to just go out. And when you get to that point, that's great, but you still need to go back and audit. And so that again is where the human in the loop is the humans are involved, but rather than being in the loop, the humans are on the loop. They are going back after the reports have gone out and doing an audit and going back and spot checking some number of randomly selected reports, where that those reports that went out were all correct, that the surveys were done correctly, that the data was transformed correctly, that at each step of the process we handled it right. And so those audits are really important, and they help you make sure that over time, as the gears might get loose or something like that, the nuts and bolts of it might get squeaky, that we are checking and we are catching any deviations that might set the process off track. So the human in the loop and the human on the loop are very important concepts. People do need to still be involved. It's just they don't need to be involved in every task at every minute. This workflow can operate 24/7, 365 days a year, and without any humans involved in slowing it down. And so the auditing, being able to go back and audit the results and checking for things just gives everybody a lot of peace of mind that while the machinery is working and doing its thing, it is producing a good result. So hopefully that's helpful in understanding this transition one has to go through, this change in mindset as you go from a manual workflow into an automated workflow of this type. Please let us know if you have any questions. I hope you'll read the case study and send us your comments, send us your questions. We're happy to chat about it. In the meanwhile, thank you and take care.